Labadiena visiems.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We now begin our press conference of today, dedicated to discussing the Global Parliamentary Congress, the Future of the World, that has been held in the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania. Present in today's press conference is Mr. Raimundas Lopata, Chair of the Seimas Committee for the Future, Mr. Duarte Pacheco, President of the Interparliamentary Union, Mr. Rodrigo Goni Reyes, the Chair of the Special Committee on the Future of the General Assembly of Uruguay, Ms. Sophie Howe, former Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, United Kingdom, and Mr. Emanuelis Zingeris, Deputy Chair of the Committee on European Affairs of the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania. The press conference will be held in both Lithuanian and English, with interpretation available. The questions from the press are invited after the initial introductions and speeches by the distinguished speakers. And now giving the floor to Mr. Raimundas Lopata, Chair of the Committee for the Future of the Seimas. Today's Congress, The Future of the World, was dedicated to discussing the problems pertaining to the futures. The global parliaments were focused on these tendencies in this global Congress because they had a very little role in this respect up until now. And we wanted to make sure that focusing on the futures would be part of the agenda of our parliaments worldwide. The problems discussed in today's Congress have been summarized in the Congress's joint statement, the text of which you will have available. It also focuses on our joint future as well as the one with respect to the situation in Ukraine. The next UN summit will focus on the Pact on the Future and the Future Generations Declaration, two milestone documents, and the upcoming summit of the Global Summit of the Committees for the Future to be held in Montevideo, Uruguay, will focus on the decisions related to the futures, including the said two documents. This Congress invited the participants and representatives from 30 countries of the world. It was an event which allowed an in-depth vision into the realities of the present world. Thank you. And we would now like to give the floor to Mr. Duarte Pacheco, President of the Interparliamentary Union.
Thank you. Just allow me to share with you three ideas. The first one is to say thank you to the Seimas of Republic of Lithuania for the organization of this Congress. We know that behind what happened during these 2 days is a lot of work, a lot of commitment. Thank you so much for all the organization and the way you welcome all of us here in Vilnius. The second word is to express the relevance of what we discussed. We discussed the future of the world. So we are not discussing, and we know that parliamentarians sometimes we are so focused or try to solve concrete problems of the people we represent that we don't have time to make a reflection about strategies for the future. But it is what we did during these 2 days. It's completely different from the usual, and I think it is essential as well. Not just solve concrete problems, but to have a reflection about the future of the world in all aspects, sustainable development, to strengthen democracy, the change in geopolitical strategies after what happened in Ukraine, and so on, so on. We did it during these 3 days. And finally, to give a parliamentarian perspective. We know that the conference will happen with the support of United Nations next year. And during this conference, we will have our governments there talking about the future of the world. But it is essential to have a parliamentary dimension in this debate, in this reflection, because the governments represented the states, but the parliamentarians represented the people. And that's why it's also important, not just to have the perspective of the states, but the perspective of the people we represent. And this is one of the conclusions of these 2 days. Try to convince the international organizations, the United Nations, and our own governments how relevant is the participation of parliamentarians in this process. Thank you for the event. I think we will have more work to do in the future, but what we did here was real, relevant and important. Thank you.
Dėkojame. Kviečiame pasisakyti Urugvajaus Rytų Respublikos Generalinės Asamblėjos ateities komiteto pirmininką Rodrigo
Goni Reyes, Chair of the Special Committee on the Future of the General Assembly of Uruguay.
For Uruguay from Latin America, it was a privilege to participate in this summit. As you know, we are in a global world. We have to face the challenges for the democracy in Lithuania, in the Baltic region, Baltic Sea, Europe, also America Latina, of course, another continent. So we have to continue working to face the challenges of the democracy, So we agree with Mr. Lopata last October. We have to continue this work, this kind of work. In these days in Lithuania, focus, of course, in one of the main problem to democracy, but we have to continue. And next September, on the end of September, we hope Mr. Lopata and, of course, Sofia and other European Parliament could participate in the next summit in Uruguay at the end of September to continue facing these kind of challenges that, as you know, we have to work together in the whole world. Thank you.
Dėkojame. Maloniai kviečiame pasisakyti tvarios ateities ir gerovės patarėją, pirmąją Velso ateities kartų komisarę,
Sophie Howe, Sustainability, Futures and Wellbeing Advisor, and the first Future Generations Commissioner for Wales.
Thank you. Can I also express my gratitude to Seimas in Lithuania for convening this very important dialogue. It's very clear by a new term that has entered into our vocabulary, polycrisis, that now is certainly the time for us to be making sure that we are taking long-term decisions with the interests of future generations in mind. We are seeing huge global threats in terms of climate change, clearly geopolitical threats, and the war in Ukraine being significant in that regard, polarization and the rise of artificial intelligence and the potential threats or opportunities that could provide. But my colleagues here are right in that for a very long time politics has been endemically short-term. Short-termism is baked into political systems because of short-term political cycles and electoral cycles, short-term budget cycles, often the things that the public and politicians and the media care about are short-term performance measures. And that has all led to us taking our eye off the ball in terms of some of these long-term threats. And so it is critically important that parliamentarians and our governments, and indeed our international institutions like the United Nations, are turning their minds to reforming our governance systems so that they are embedding long-term thinking and applying a test of intergenerational fairness, or if you like, applying a test of, are we being good ancestors? What is the world that we are leaving behind to our children, our grandchildren and future generations to come? And if we look 50,000 years to the past, there have been about 100 billion people who were once alive and are now dead. There's about 8 billion people on the planet at the moment, but if we look 50,000 years to the future, there are about 6.75 trillion people yet to be born. And we are at a moment in time now, decade of delivery, it's often called, a moment in time where the actions of our current leaders will determine the futures of those 6.75 trillion people who are yet to be born. And that's why it's so absolutely critical that we are shifting away from short-termism. Of course, we will also always have to deal with crises that emerge, but a convening of like-minded countries, parliamentarians, with institutions of Europe, institutions from the United Nations, those who perhaps have experience in my case of being an independent commissioner, holding our government to Wales to account on how they act in the interests of future generations. Now is that critical time to make sure that we are, yes, addressing the problems that we see now, but we are not creating more problems for our predecessors. So I very much look forward to continuing this dialogue. I'm very encouraged and optimistic by the fact that this dialogue has taken place, but the time for action is now, and the time for reforming our governance systems to act as good ancestors is certainly now.
Dėkojame. Kviečiame pasisakyti.
Thank you very much, and we would now like to give the floor to Mr. Emanuel Zingeris, Deputy Chair of the Seimas Committee on European Affairs.
Aš manau, kad tai buvo įspūdingos ir reikšmingos dvi dienos.
Thank you very much. Well, I believe we've witnessed 2 impressive days of this event. It's my 8th term in office as member of the Parliament, and this was one of the most impressive parliamentary exchanges that I've happened to have taken place and have taken part in. The movement that started in Helsinki has already demonstrated its first signs of direction. Dear colleagues, I would treat this dialogue that we've witnessed for the past 2 days as recommendations for the upcoming summits. Colleagues, you find yourself now in a country which for 50 years during its Soviet occupation had no chance to witness free election and fair election. However, as of 1990, we've tried to break free, and we've succeeded. Today, we have a internationally recognized Taiwanese representation. We are demonstrating our solidarity with Ukraine. However, we do not forget neither Belarus nor Russia. You've heard about the Nobel Prize winners whose representatives talked about the situation in Belarus, as well as in Russia, where there's no place for democracy left. But we do hope that once Ukraine is liberated, we will be able to return to the idea of restoring democracy in Belarus and in Russia, and we will not leave China behind as well. The main goal of our Congress was to make sure that nobody believes that our legitimacy and our legitimate actions cannot bear any fruitful results. We are the ones that are in the position to warn other nations by bearing in mind what we see from our constituencies and by bearing in mind what we hear what's happening worldwide. So my final remark would be that we will not allow the world to stay isolated, in the sense that we will not allow the number of democracies to diminish. In turn, we will try to find the right models for enlarging democracy, making sure that democratic elections take place across all the countries of the world. I would like to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to Mr. Lopato for organizing such an event at the same time. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now questions are welcome.
Tai jei klausimų nėra, tuomet dėkojame už dalyvavimą.
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for your attention, and this completes our press conference. Have a nice day.